Iron Curtain of Censorship and a Go Woke or Go Broke episode, but no dumbest bill in America. This is Mark Fisher with Mark and the Millennials, and the Millennial joining me today is on the other side of the camera, and that's our assistant producer, Christopher Hopkins, and of course our producer, Adam Katora. We want to thank everybody for being with us this podcast called The Iron Curtain of Censorship, and of course Go Woke or Go Broke. So first up, the Iron Curtain of Censorship. Well, what is that? Well, that's Rudy Giuliani, of course, referring to the Iron Curtain speech that was made by Winston Churchill, of course, and that particular speech was made back in 1946 at Westminster College in Fulton, Missouri. And it was made for the purpose of talking about how the Soviet Union had put down kind of a proverbial, invisible, but real nonetheless, Iron Curtain across separating Eastern Europe from Western Europe because of the fact that they wanted to make sure that people couldn't get in or out of the Soviet Union, and they wanted to control all information inside the Soviet Union, that no one could communicate about anything that was an anti-government issue. Kind of what's going on now, imagine that. So Trump's legal team releases the Kraken, which we'll talk about, and they're talking about election fraud at a press conference. And let me tell you something, the media they're going crazy. I've never seen anything like this before in my life. The media they're losing their minds. We have a number of clips from this press conference. No doubt you've heard pieces of this press conference, but we have clips which we really think are the highlights of the press conference, because they speak to specific issues and they speak to what I think everybody who has voted for Donald Trump sees as concerning about this election. Let's just put it that way. So first up, we have Jenna Ellis. Jenna Ellis is the Trump campaign's senior legal advisor. Okay, she's their senior legal advisor, and she gets up to the podium and she talks about the general issue of this campaign and what they're trying to do, and the fact that the press conference is more of an information system, an information session, and an opening statement of what they intend to do on the Trump legal team to challenge the results of this election. So that's Jenna Ellis. We have her, and here she is.
Because when we talk about voter fraud, it's actually election official fraud. That cannot stand. The Constitution requires that the state legislatures are the ones that make election law. It still has to go by the U.S. Constitution. But what has happened in this case is that state and local level officials, and all the way up, have changed the rules. That's what the Democrats do. If they don't like the rules, they change them. And they change them at the last minute. They manipulate them. They want to tear down our American system.
Yeah, so I think that's pretty straightforward. That's the opening statement, that there are people that want to tear down the American system. They don't really care how they gain power. They just know that the ends justify the means, which is very Machiavellian. And as long as they get power, that's all that matters. Because once they get power, they're going to do everything they can to keep that power and make sure, that cheating in the future is institutionalized, which I think everybody agrees it's already institutionalized in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, because it's been going on for a long time, and it's also institutionalized in Chicago, Illinois. But we also have another clip from Jenna Ellis, and she's talking about Alexander Hamilton's Federalist 68. And we're going to talk about this in a minute, and here's that clip.
Our founders were so brilliant that they anticipated this, that there would be corruption, there would be foreign influence, there would be attempts to manipulate the outcome of the election, especially with who they called our chief magistrate. I would encourage all of you to go home and actually read Alexander Hamilton's Federalist 68 and see what he described as an advocacy position to adopt and ratify the Electoral College and the process by which we select our president. We select our president through the Electoral College not because it disenfranchises voters, but because it is a security mechanism for exactly the type of corruption that we are uncovering. And every American should be grateful and thankful that our founders had the foresight to put in those protections and provisions to make sure that your legitimate legal vote is not disenfranchised.
Check and the balance. That's all. Talking about checks and balances in government. And so two things going on there with what you just heard from Jenna Ellis. First thing, First thing, she's sending a thinly veiled threat to the Democrat Party that we still have the Electoral College, and there is a way to elect the President of the United States if we can demonstrate that there has been enough corruption. Even if that demonstration hasn't been made in a timely manner, and that is to say, even if certain courts throw out the cases, even if there isn't enough time, which I think probably is really the issue, there probably really isn't enough time. This is something that would normally take many months to demonstrate and to investigate and to prove, because the Democrats have been spending many years to get to this point in these particular swing states to cheat. And now, of course, I think, and certainly Jenna Ellis is saying, well, it would take normally a lot of time, but in Federal 68, Alexander Hamilton spells out the fact that we have checks and balances in place, including the Electoral College, and this is the second thing that's going on here, that would allow us to still elect Donald Trump. And Donald Trump would be elected by those electors because they would recognize that there was so much fraud, there was not enough time to do a redo of the election. Let's face it, there isn't enough time to do the redo of the election. I mean, my personal opinion is that's what really should happen. I really believe that. I think that I don't see how you can have I suppose, that you could have Pennsylvania revote, but I really believe that the entire country should revote, and they should do so in person. I think there should be voter ID. I mean, everybody out there agrees with that, of course, but isn't it remarkable that we don't have that in every state? There should be voter ID, and you should vote in person. And, okay, so then you're going to hear the people, what about the people that can't get to the polls because they're sick and no? Okay, fine. Then you can request a ballot, an absentee ballot, but you have to request the absentee ballot. And you have to demonstrate that when you request the absentee ballot that you're doing so because you can't physically, because of your health, make it to the polls. Otherwise, there should be no excuses. There should be no excuse voting. There should be no excuse to show up at the polls in person, show your ID and say, this is me, here is my driver's license, I'm here to vote. And I think what you'll see, of course, is you'll see an election that turns out very differently from the election that we just saw. And of course, if you're on the other side of the fence here and you're saying, oh, well, Mark, that of course the Republicans would win then because, people who are working people, in the inner city of Philadelphia and in Detroit, Michigan and elsewhere, they can't get to the polls in person. They're going to lose, their hours at work and so forth. Folks, can I tell you something? There's a pandemic that's going on. Most people aren't working anyway. All right, most people who are in that particular situation in the inner cities that I've described, they're already on unemployment. So they have all the time in the world at this particular moment in time to get to the polls in person if they really want to vote that day and show their ID. And look, this is easy. This is not hard. This is why we know there's been so much cheating. This is why we know. So we have a few other clips of this press conference. And I know that this particular clip, this next one from Sidney Powell, this really has a lot of people, I think, riled up, especially on the right. People who are Republicans and conservatives, they're really riled up about this because they are wondering how much truth there is to the Dominion voting systems and all of Dominion's partners that have provided them various parts of their voting system. Because apparently it's not just Dominion, there are a whole slew of different companies, many of which have changed ownership and or changed names and changed purposes. Nonetheless, we have this clip from Sidney Powell where she's releasing the Kraken, and I want you to listen to this clip, and here it is.
You've spoken of unleashing the Kraken. Is the country ready for this? I mean, Americans should be astonished at what you're saying here today. Is the country on the verge of an electoral breakdown?
We've already had it. We have already had that electoral breakdown.
Yep.
But the Constitution, as Jenna explains, has provisions in it for how you fix this. And there should never be another election conducted in this country, I don't care if it's for local dog catcher, using a Dominion machine and Smartmatic software.
That, ladies and gentlemen, is Sidney Powell taking a swipe at Barack Obama. She's literally, because Barack Obama was just on CBS News with Gayle King, and he was talking about the dog catcher issue as well. So, interestingly enough, we have that clip about Obama when he's with Gayle King, talking about the need for a peaceful transfer of power. I mean, even a dog catcher. That was Sidney Powell basically hitting Barack Obama right in the stomach. I love it. We have that clip, and here it is.
The peaceful transfer of power, the notion that any of us who attain an elected office, whether it's dog catcher or president, are servants of the people. It's a temporary job. We're not above the rules. We're not above the law. That's the essence of our democracy.
He's so full of it. He is so full of it. Even a dog catcher. And of course, Sidney Powell did the same thing because that was her, Sidney Powell, hitting Obama, saying, yeah, of course there should be a peaceful transfer of power if you have a free and fair election. But we haven't had that. And we're demonstrating that. And I think any reasonable person who looks at the fact that you have a president who's winning the in-person vote, but you have two separate systems. You have the in-person vote of Republicans showing up and independents voting the day of the election. And then the next day or two or three, you have people voting by mail and the votes are still coming in. And miraculously, they're just enough for the most part to win the election in these states. I'm sorry, any reasonable person knows that this is silly. So also, Sidney Powell, when she talked about the Kraken, so if you're not a fan of bizarre fantasy films, you may not recognize the line from the 1981 Clash of the Titans film and its 2010 remake, which featured Liam Neeson uttering the line, though you've likely seen the endless silly memes it's inspired. In the film, Zeus orders an enormous sea monster called a Kraken to destroy the kingdom of Argo. In Norse mythology, krakens appear more like gigantic squids that attack ships. Today's modern usage of the term, unrelated to Powell's comments and Zeus, often refers to the Seattle's professional hockey team, Kraken, as well as the popular brand of rum. Yeah, whatever. I mean, obviously, she's talking about the huge sea monster and squid that's got all of its tentacles out there trying to basically catch all of these criminals who have conspired, and I believe this is true, who have conspired to steal a presidential election. And I also want to say this, good for you, Sidney Powell, for hitting Barack Obama, trying to make it seem like it's really not a big deal that, that President Trump has been cheated out of an election or that any part of this election, let's make this clear. Even if there are 5 states or 6 states where there has been massive cheating, and you say to yourself, yeah, but Biden still would win. He would still win because he got all these other states over here. That shouldn't matter. No state should be cheated out of its electors when the state went in one direction, but you get to the Electoral College, and in fact, what you find out is that the people of the state spoke one way and the electors go a different way. What I'm saying is in Pennsylvania, I think Donald Trump clearly won Pennsylvania. I think he clearly won Michigan and Wisconsin. I actually believe that he won Nevada. I'm going to say something that's kind of interesting too, and it's funny, I've said this in a past podcast. I believe Donald Trump actually won New Mexico. I said this before Rudy Giuliani brought this up, because New Mexico has a substantial oil and natural gas industry. And of course, as everybody knows, Biden was attacking that industry. All the Democrats were. They're going to shut you down. We're going to ban you. We're going to stop you. And if you're in New Mexico and you're hearing that, and it doesn't matter what part of the pay scale that you're on, you're probably not going to vote for people that want to put you out of a job. And I am convinced that the New Mexico election, something happened there. And I think what happened there was not with absentee ballots. I think what happened in New Mexico relates more to the Dominion voting systems. And I also think, of course, there was also issues, no doubt, in Las Vegas. Look, in Las Vegas and Clark County, Las Vegas is the king of cheating anyway. That's where the casinos are. These people, this is what they do for a living. They cheat you out of your money when you go there. I'm always blown away when people go to casinos and I'm gonna go there with $1,000 and come home with $10,000. Yeah, right. Everybody that tells me that they made money when they come back from a casino, I'm sorry. I mean, average that out to like their 10 visits, and I'm sure they actually lost money. So Rudolph Giuliani, he laughs out loud at CNN. So podcast listeners, you have to listen to this. So Rudolph Giuliani at the press conference, he starts receiving questions. He gets questions. He's fielding questions. And I think his first question out of the box or out of the gate was from CNN. And he literally laughs in their face. Literally laughs in their face. You have to listen to this. It is hysterically funny. We had that clip, and here it is.
Sir, is it your goal here to pressure officials and lawmakers in these battleground states to block or delay certifications so the GOP can pick their own electors? Is that the end game here?
Our goal here is to go around the iron curtain of censorship. That what publication are you with?
CNN.
It's to go around the outrageous iron curtain of censorship and get facts to the American people that if you were a fair and honest network, you'd have been reporting for the last 2 weeks. These are facts. These are things that actually happened. These people really wrote these affidavits. These affidavits are really part of the public record. You're concealing them, you're covering them up, and our role here is to do your job because you don't do it.
Brilliant, right? Brilliant. Giuliani, our role here is to do your job because you don't do it. There was a time when we had investigative journalism. And investigative journalists, by the way, used to make a lot of money. People would go to college for the purpose of becoming a journalist because they one day dreamed of becoming the next Woodward, right? They would be that person to discover and expose Watergate or expose the next, Bill Clinton in the Oval Office with Monica Lewinsky. Nonetheless, it's real stuff. This is real stuff. There used to be investigative journalists that would not just ask questions, but then they would go and look at, the affidavits. They would go into Philadelphia and start asking questions of poll watchers and asking questions of people that actually work for the election board. They would assimilate a lot of information and then they would write a story about what they were told and what they heard, and they had these sources, and that's where they would get the information. But that doesn't happen now. Instead, it's all superficial. It's all superficial. You have CNN there asking another hit job question. They aren't interested in finding any kind of information about election fraud. They're not even interested in listening to it. They just want to report what they're told, and that's why Rudolph Giuliani so clearly and so well uses this term, which I love, which is an iron curtain of censorship, which is what we're calling this podcast, because really that identifies, in my mind, better than anything else, 2020 as it relates to politics. We have an iron curtain of censorship. We have a media that isn't interested in investigative journalism. We have big tech, Facebook, Google, Twitter, just to name a few, that aren't interested in posting anything or allowing you to post anything that in any way questions this election. And in fact, when you pull up Facebook or you pull up Twitter or you pull up anything on Google, by the way, what does it say? Would you like to see the results of the election? Joe Biden won, by the way. Actually, I don't think Joe Biden has won yet because no state that I'm aware of has certified its elections. And until a state certifies its election and then certifies the actual electors that go to the Electoral College, we don't have a president. I mean, you can certainly say Joe Biden appears to be the winner. Stay tuned until until we have an Electoral College vote, or stay tuned until the electors are chosen. Fine. That would at least educate people, but no, big tech isn't interested. So this iron curtain of censorship includes big tech. It includes mainstream media. It includes Hollywood. It includes all of the colleges and universities in America, which, by the way, we're going to talk about later. Later, we're going to talk about something outrageous that's happened from a member of the California Democrat Party and what he said about deprogramming people. But nonetheless, good for you, Rudolph Giuliani, for basically laughing out loud in CNN's face, because I think that's what you have to do to these journalists now, journalists in quotes, because you have to laugh at them. You have to laugh in their face and just say, you're not a journalist. If you were a journalist, you wouldn't work at CNN. If you were really a journalist, you wouldn't work at MSNBC. And I think shaming people about their profession, when they have this education, a 4-year education or maybe even a graduate degree, and they've studied, writing and creative writing, and they've studied journalism, and then they go and work for these companies, they really can't be taken seriously at this point because the companies themselves are all about propaganda. And I think everybody knows it. So we have another clip from Rudy Giuliani at that particular press conference where the Trump team is taking on many, many lawsuits across the country to show and demonstrate fraud and collusion. Yep, I use that word, collusion, between many Democrat operatives across the country to collude and steal an election by using mail-in ballots, among other things. We have Giuliani, and he says, where's the FBI? Generally speaking, where's the FBI? Because the FBI is responsible for investigating anything that happens in the United States of America. The FBI isn't responsible for investigating overseas issues. They investigate stuff that's happening right here, such as election fraud. Where's the FBI? We had that clip, and here it is.
I don't know where the FBI has been for the last 3 years. I have no idea where the FBI has been for the last 4 years. Explain to me how the FBI concealed a memo in the hand of Brennan to Obama saying that Hillary basically made up the Russian collusion plot. They withheld that for 4 years and cost our country $40 million and 2 impeachment, one attempted, one actual, and then an acquittal proceeding. I don't know where they've been. I don't know where they were on the hard drive. They got it 10 months ago. There are clear crimes revealed on it. Didn't do anything with that. I don't know where they are now. Our country has had its ballots counted, calculated, and manipulated in a foreign country with a company controlled by friends of an enemy of the United States. What do we have to do to get the FBI to wake up?
Beautiful. What do we have to do to get the FBI to wake up? Not to mention the Hunter Biden cover-up, which Giuliani also speaks to. How can the FBI have the hard drive for a year, as Giuliani just discussed? How could he have it for a year, the FBI, and do nothing with it? How could they allow an election to move forward and not even, charge Hunter Biden because there are clear crimes that are on the hard drive? What the heck's happened to the FBI? And so Giuliani lays out two coup attempts, one against Donald Trump with the Russian collusion hoax, and basically says that Brennan and Obama knew what Hillary Clinton was doing with the Russian collusion hoax. They knew it, Brennan and Obama. They both knew. And that's why, of course, podcast listeners, that Barack Obama has been so vocal the last few weeks. He's been so vocal because first he was terrified that Donald Trump would win a second term and probably come after him. And then second, now that, it appears that Joe Biden has cheated his way to election, you have Obama coming forward and trying to go in for the kill of Donald Trump and any of the other Trump supporters to be able to hide and cover up all of the stuff that they were up to try to engage in a coup to begin with of Donald Trump. So it's just incredible what they're doing here. And then we have Facebook itself that engaged in voter turnout in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, perhaps elsewhere too. I'm sure they did it all over the country. But in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, my understanding is Facebook was actually paid potentially, or Facebook itself paid potentially, Facebook workers or others working for Facebook to get out the vote. That's an election violation. That's an election law violation. You can't do that unless you report that to the local election board as an in-kind contribution. Did Facebook do that? I don't know. But where are the investigative journalists? Where is the FBI looking into that? I mean, talk about collusion of big tech and big media to try to bring down a president. So that was the Iron Curtain of Censorship, as I called it, press conference. Just a brilliant press conference, very well executed, and clearly speaks to the 75 million, half of the country, that has voted for Donald Trump. And I really think it's at least 75 million people, because I do believe there are many people who didn't show up at the polls to vote for Donald Trump because they were turned off by all of the fake news estimates of how far ahead Joe Biden was. And I also think that there were votes that were taken away from Trump too. I do believe that is a strong possibility, because every time you have a Joe Biden voter submit a fraudulent ballot, that's a vote that's taken away from someone who votes honestly and votes the proper way. It is. It's just wrong. So get this, podcast listeners. The media loses their minds at a Pence press conference. Yes. So Mike Pence, Vice President of the United States, has a press conference about coronavirus. And the task force is with him, and they're talking about vaccines. And the fact that we now have 2 vaccines that just are waiting for approval from the FDA. And once they are approved, and we hope to expedite approval, obviously, is what Pence says. Once they are approved, they will be widely distributed and available. Obviously, they will be made available to folks who are at high risk first, but I'm sure even before that, to people that work in hospitals and doctors and anyone who's a first responder. Makes perfect sense. But nonetheless, that's 2 companies so far. So Pence has a press conference, and he's talking about this incredible achievement, right? This incredible achievement. Because when you think about it, think about all of the other kinds of viruses that are out there that we haven't been able to find a vaccine for that is 95% effective, let alone effective at all. And they did this. The Trump administration worked with the private sector, and they did this in less than a year. It's unbelievable. It's an extraordinary accomplishment, and it demonstrates something really positive when government knows its proper role and works with the private sector and creates competition between companies to see who can not just get the first vaccine, but also who can invent the best vaccine. That is what the Trump administration did. So Pence has this press conference, and then at the end of the press conference, the media goes insane. Not about the vaccine. They go insane about the fact that the Trump-Pence administration is challenging the election. I mean, they've lost their minds. Listen to this. Listen to this clip. We have it, and here it is.
And we will get through this together.
Mr. Vice President.
Thank you all.
Mr. Vice President. Are you really not going to take questions? All of you need to answer this.
Why is the federal government...
What is going on? You're not working with the transition. You're all part of not recognizing democracy. You're all undermining the democratic election. Every one of you.
Why is the federal
And you won't work with the transition.
Can you believe that? That's at a press. This is the United States of America. It sounds like a banana republic. You're undermining democracy. You're undermining democracy. I mean, why do you think you're doing this? You're crazy. You're undermining it. This guy, obviously, he's an alleged journalist, clearly never really took a true course in journalism and doesn't even know what the right question is to ask, which is maybe, hey, Mr. Vice President, thanks for the information on the vaccine. I have a question about your challenging the election. Do you think this falls within the constitutional parameters that you're challenging the election itself? And then give Pence an opportunity to respond. Maybe pull out the Constitution of the United States while you're at it and read it, because clearly this president, like any president before and after, have every right to challenge the validity of an election and taking their concerns to court, obviously. But nonetheless, the media has lost their minds. I mean, you heard them. I mean, that is not what a normal person does. It's not what a normal country does. But and that, by the way, was at a press conference about vaccines, about something that is so game-changing so that we can get our lives back to normal. We want to get back to normal. Every American does, no matter what your party affiliation. But nonetheless, the media has lost their minds because they don't want Trump to get credit for these vaccines. We don't want to give him credit for it because then he might be an historical figure. He might be like a really important figure. We can't do that. We must wait and get Biden in there right away so we can give him the credit for the vaccines. Oh yeah, right. Biden, he just turned 78. I mean, the man can barely finish a sentence. So just to prove that the media has lost their minds about trying to not give credit to Trump and Pence for their coronavirus task force and finding a vaccine and working with the private sector to do just that, MSNBC's Joy Reid actually decides to fact check, except her fact checking is, of course, wrong. I mean, once again, where did you get your degree from? You know, the bubblegum machine? So that's what we used to say, by the way. So here's MSNBC's Joy Reid literally fact checking the fact that the Pence press conference is wrong, that the fact that we had these vaccines, it's not from Trump Pence, and it's not even from Pfizer or Moderna. No, she fact checks them. You got to listen to this. Here it is.
So while Republicans are busy demanding freedom from masks, they apparently could care less about the 248,000 Americans who've lost their lives to the virus. And they accept no responsibility for any of it. In fact, believe it or not, they think they deserve credit.
This vaccine truly is the light at the end of the tunnel, and it's made possible by the commitment of the Republican majority in the Senate and this administration and our efforts to focus on Operation Warp Speed.
Operation Warp Speed has been a tremendous success for this administration. I do want to give a shout out to the Trump administration for making this possible.
It looks to me like the Speaker, the Democratic leader of the Senate, and former Vice President Biden all have the view that $2.5 trillion or nothing.
We will continue to have an open door, and we're ready to negotiate at a moment's notice.
I just want to fact check real quick and remind y'all that the companies themselves that are producing these vaccines were not involved in Operation Warp Speed and have said as much. So that's a lie.
Can you believe that? Joy Reid, at the end of those clips, Joy Reid from MSNBC, she fact checks, according to Joy Reid, she provides a fact check and says, no, Moderna and Pfizer were not part of Operation Warp Speed. I mean, literally, part of the stimulus was to provide money to these companies and incentives to be able to produce vaccines. So how did they do that? How did the federal government do that? How did Operation Warp Speed do that? They did that by saying, hey, we will buy the vaccine from you, the United States government will, so that we can make sure that everybody in the country has a vaccine. But here's the caveat. You, Moderna, and you, Pfizer, and all of the other companies who want to compete have to actually create and invent the vaccine. And if you do, the federal government will be your customer. In other words, you have a guaranteed customer of 330 million doses, not to mention the doses that you could sell overseas, right? So if you're a company and you're looking at this opportunity, you're saying, wow, I've got a guaranteed customer. You can't get a better customer than the United States federal government. That is the best customer you could possibly want because you know you're going to get paid. And they are literally signing a guarantee saying we're going to buy 330 million doses from you. And so you naturally get your people to work and you say, okay, all hands on deck. We are going to find a cure. We're going to find a vaccine. We're going to find something that saves lives so that the people in this country can get back to normal. That was all part of Operation Warp Speed. It made perfect sense. It was a beautiful coordination between the federal government and federal tax dollars and the private sector. And that was part of the entire Trump-Pence plan, brilliant plan, and now we have those vaccines. And what does Joy Reid say? Oh no, that wasn't part of it. I'm a fact checker. That was never part of Operation Warp Speed. This is how much the media has lost their minds. The media has lost their minds. And so next up, podcast listeners, we have a Go Broke or Go Woke segment. Yes, that's right. We have no dumbest bill. We do have one coming up, I think the next podcast, which is going to be from San Francisco, by the way. But we have, next up, Go Woke or Go Broke, which is banning Trump supporters at Harvard. That's right, Go Woke or Go Broke, banning Trump supporters at Harvard. So, Harvard graduate students have basically gotten a petition together to say, we don't want anyone from the Trump administration to come here and speak. I mean, they just are really, really scary people. So we don't want them to come here. We're going to ban them. We're going to ban them from coming. We're going to ban them from speaking. We're going to ban them from teaching at Harvard. I mean, think about that. You're going to ban them because our gentle ears can't hear we just can't hear what they might say. So we have Kayleigh McEnany, who was asked about this by Stuart Varney on Fox Business News. I'm a big Stuart Varney fan, by the way, and I know some people are upset about Fox News, but Fox Business News is really kind of the go-to channel for me because the other business news channels like Bloomberg and CNBC, they're completely left, which is hard to believe that's happened to the business channels, but it has, and Stuart Varney is definitely a conservative. So nonetheless, Stuart Varney gets up there and he interviews Kayleigh McEnany about the banning Harvard from stopping, and banning people from coming onto Harvard who used to work at the Trump administration from teaching or from going to school there. We have the first clip, and here it is.
I hope the administration stands firm against this sort of call from censorship among the students. Because when I was there, Stuart, there was this uprising of leftists on campus that tried to silence the speech of people from the right and conservative individuals, and the administration actually stood up against them. They asked for exam exemptions during a time of racial protest, and the administration said, no, you got to show up for your exams. So I hope the administration, the same way they did when I was there, rebukes this movement, because censorship should not be tolerated. Our academic communities should be bastions of free speech and the countering and jousting of ideas, not the censorship of a viewpoint that you feel is unpalatable.
So you know how in the earlier part of this podcast we were talking about Rudy Giuliani, and he was actually laughing in the face of CNN, laughing at them like, yeah, you're hardly a journalist, and literally going, ha ha, I mean, that's what a professor needs to start doing, I think, to students who come to the professor and say, Professor, we want you to sign this petition because we don't want any Trump officials to come speak here. That should be banned. A good professor would laugh in their face and say, are you really an adult? Are you really an adult that your precious ears can't even listen to some alternative point of view? And oh, by the way, then leave. Don't stay here at Harvard. Leave. Or don't stay in that class when that particular Trump official comes to speak. When I was in college, we used to have speakers all the time come to George Washington University. We had Ted Kennedy. Okay, he's now deceased. We had all kinds of far left speakers, and on rare occasions, I mean very rare occasions, we would have a conservative come speak. Like at that time, Newt Gingrich was an everyday congressman. He wasn't even Speaker of the House yet. He was just a congressman from Georgia. And we had him speak. And there wasn't an issue, right? If you didn't want to hear the person, don't go. But you know what I did? I would go to all those different venues and listen to them because it was free. I was a student. I'm like, well, what's the worst that's going to happen? I can just shake my head and say, I don't agree with this person. And that's really what learning is about. You learn to at least have critical thinking skills and listen to these different people, even if you don't agree with them, but not at Harvard. Our so-called nation's best university has students in it that can't even bear to listen to an alternative point of view. So we have a second clip from Stuart Varney of Fox News, where he's interviewing Kayleigh McEnany about the Harvard ban. And we have that clip, and here it is.
I really would like to see that. I'd like to see them throw you out, or try to. I'm not being funny. I want somebody to challenge these people, because they should not be getting away with this.
Absolutely. I would do just that, Stuart. I will happily walk back on campus and challenge this. While I was there, I was very vocal about my support for President Trump back in 2015 and 2016. Was not ashamed to espouse my conservative views, even if it brought me the ire of other students. And I certainly would be opening to challenge that, along with many others in this administration.
I wouldn't mess with Kayleigh McEnany. That's all I'm saying. So get this. Connected to this whole Harvard thing, there is an article that came out. How do you deprogram 75 million people? How do you deprogram 75 million people, Trump supporters, of course? A California Democrat wants post-World War II type re-education for conservatives. A California Democrat wants post-World War II type re-education camps for conservatives. So here's what it says. A California Democrat's regional director suggested Wednesday that President Donald Trump's supporters should be deprogrammed through post-World War II reconstruction tactics. Seriously, how do you deprogram 75 million people? California Democrats regional director and Democratic National Convention member David Atkins tweeted Wednesday. Where do you start to deprogram them? Fox? Facebook? We have to start thinking in terms of post-World War II Germany or Japan, or the failures of Reconstruction in the South. This is not your standard partisan policy disagreement, he continued. This is a conspiracy theory-fueled belligerent death cult against reality and basic decency. The only actual policy debates of note are happening within the Dem coalition between the left and the center left. The California Democrat director noted that he saw that some conservatives were upset by some of the responses here. It's unbelievable. And he tweeted this. I mean, this is what he put out there to the world. So he's saying that in Germany and Japan, post-World War II, we implemented as a country, through the Marshall Plan, of course, we rebuilt these countries, Germany and Japan. The United States taxpayers did, by the way. We rebuilt these countries, and we did so to try to make them to create Democrat institutions and to create systems of government where you had checks and balances, and so that they were free societies and they weren't run by tyrants and they weren't run by totalitarian regimes or cults, if you will, like they were in Japan with the emperor. And so what he's saying is, what this guy is saying in California is that the Trump movement is a cult and therefore you need to deprogram people. And he doesn't even understand the fact that there's not a cult here. There's not a cult here. There's a feeling and a sense by the 75 million people that voted for Donald Trump. There's a sense that the United States government is out of control and that it has been taken over by institutions and globalists who only want to enrich themselves and are doing so at the expense of the American people. And Donald Trump has exposed this, and we actually see that this is indeed so. We know it is so. We know it is so because we've seen the hollowing out of the middle of the country, where we once had factories and where we once made anything and everything, and now those factories are gone and they've been shipped overseas. And the Republicans and Democrats alike, both parties have allowed this to happen. And so, anyway, I just can't believe that anyone would say that we need to deprogram 75 million people. It demonstrates to you, and it should demonstrate to you how you should be worried between Harvard University, right, the top university in the country, at least that's what they think they are, and Democrat operatives saying you need to deprogram 75 million people, and big tech saying the same thing. You should be worried, Americans. You should be worried, podcast listeners, that this is what is happening to our country. And they don't seem to understand that there are 75 million of us who are willing to fight back. And I mean really willing to fight back with whatever it takes to make sure that our country is saved. And it's saved from these crazy people who are telling us that there shouldn't be a First Amendment. There shouldn't be a First Amendment. I mean, who does that? So in any event, that is go woke or go broke. So next up, just real briefly, we did a podcast, I don't know, a couple of weeks ago, where we talked about Oregon legalizing meth and cocaine and crack and all that stuff. So recently, the Wall Street Journal put an article, and it was an op-ed actually. It was very good too, and I just want to read briefly a few paragraphs in this because it it's something that very few pro-drug advocates, I think, actually talk about because they can't. And that is, the article is entitled, "Legal Drugs Are Fashionable and Treacherous for Children." So it's called "Legal Drugs Are Fashionable and Treacherous for Children." So in other words, when you legalize meth and you legalize cocaine and you legalize these hard drugs like Oregon has, and you basically say, oh, you can kill yourself if you want, you can shoot up heroin if you want, and who cares, right? It's your body, you get your choice. You get to do what you want. That's what the left is trying to say, of course. But what they really don't care about is they don't care about the kids. They really don't. They say they do. It's really kind of fascinating, right? It's very analogous to the same left that is saying that you should be able to abort a child all the way up to and immediately after the child's birth. So these are the same people that's saying, well, your body, your choice, you get to kill yourself with drugs. Oh, but don't look over here about how many millions of children that are affected. So here's what the article says. And it's an op-ed, actually. It says, the U.S. election didn't produce a blue wave or a red wave, but some are celebrating a green wave, as voters in Arizona, Montana, New Jersey, and South Dakota approved the legalization of recreational marijuana. Meanwhile, Oregonians decriminalized the possession of small amounts of harder drugs, including cocaine, heroin, and methamphetamines. Drugs, once thought to be the scourge of a healthy society, are getting public recognition as a part of American life, the New York Times gushed. In reality, drugs are very much a scourge, particularly in the lives of young children. In 2019, parental substance abuse was listed as a cause for a child's removal to foster care 38% of the time, a share that has risen steadily in the past decade. Experts suggest this is an underestimate and the real number may be as high as 80%. Mrs. Riley's interviews with foster parents suggest there are very few cases of children in the system that don't involve substance abuse. And that doesn't include the hundreds of thousands of children who are in the care of a single parent or other guardian because of a mother or father's drug use. In a recent paper from the National Bureau of Economic Research, 3 professors from Notre Dame estimated that if drug abuse had remained at 1996 levels, 1.5 million fewer children aged 0 to 16 would have lived away from a parent in 2015. Decriminalization efforts will likely exacerbate these problems. Such measures lower the risk and the cost of doing business for drug dealers and increase the supply of these drugs on the streets across the country. Drugs will be cheaper and easier to get for adults already suffering from untreated mental illness, poverty, or abuse, and the effects will be felt most severely by children. That's a terrific op-ed in the Wall Street Journal. Again, it was entitled, "Legal Drugs Are Fashionable, but Treacherous for Children." And essentially what they're saying is, yeah, you can try this justification all day long about my body, my choice. I get to put in my body whatever I want. Only problem is you're destroying the lives of millions of American children, because when you say to that person, oh yeah, come to Oregon, shoot up heroin, many times, of course, these adults sell their bodies, they become pregnant, or they already had children, and the children suffer. And so what you're doing is you're creating more and more poverty, and you're creating more and more despair with children, and they are always the ones that are affected by this kind of ridiculous policy making by people in Oregon and elsewhere. So I would just encourage you to think about that for a minute and just say to yourself, oh yeah, well, it's so fashionable, I'm so far left, my body, my choice. Yeah, right. These are the same people who are pro-abortion that say, now they also say, oh, it's for the children, when in fact, when it comes to legal drugs, it's the same issue. They're not for children. They're not. I'm not really sure what they're for. I don't really think they believe in anything. But the fact of the matter is that it's not good for the kids and it's not good for our society. So that's it for Mark and the Millennials. Thank you for joining Mark and the Millennials. This is Mark Fisher. Thank you to, of course, Christopher Hopkins, our assistant producer, and Adam Katura, our producer. Check us out on iTunes, Spotify, YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, Parler, Rumble, and our website. See you next time.